Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues and politics, Bible, theology, and philosophy in relationship to those issues. Today we're going to hit a little bit of the philosophy side, but also I'm kind of rubbing up against an article that a friend of mine posted on Facebook. He's a pastor, still a believer, and very Calvinistic. So, like the guy, I think he's a great guy, just really think sometimes he posts some things that can be demonstrably proven to be false. But this also is stemming from a comment from one of my commenters that regularly preaches a Vinny Rack. And he wrote this on my deconversion video from almost a week ago. Concerning value jobs, and he's talking about my remarks about Facebook and Twitter, how I get a little bit nervous when they start to censor people. And I want to make my position clear before I read the comment. I'm not saying that Facebook and Twitter don't have the right to censor Trump. I am just questioning whether or not it is, shall we say, wise to do so. Even the CEO of Twitter got out there and said, we're doing this thing, but I'm not really sure it's a wise business decision. And he may be correct on that. What I see is right now is there's a lot of people that are very in conservative media that are starting to build like their own network and their own stuff outside of Facebook and Twitter and the rest of it. Now, whether or not that'll be successful, I don't know. They also have the right to do that and do that. My problem with the banning of Trump is he is the 54th president of the United States. I know a lot of people don't want to admit that, but he was president. He was president for 4 years. Probably the more creepy thing to me is the fact that Facebook chose to basically take his voice print and ban his voice from Facebook. Now that to me is really Orwellian and quite frankly creepy, especially when you consider that history teachers have still got to teach Donald Trump, and people in education still have to deal with Donald Trump, and people that do historical archiving still have to deal with Donald Trump. By cutting him off, I don't know. Also, we'll see in a minute, but the comment goes something like this. Twitter and Facebook are private companies and thus have the right to ban whoever they want for whatever reason they want, including Trump or Biden for that matter. I don't see this as a free speech issue, but rather as an editorial one. Though not outrightly banned, the New York Times and Washington Post editorial make daily decisions as to what stories they're going to run and not run, what op-eds they're going to print and not print. I know there's a movement in journal not to name the shooters in mass shootings so as not to afford the fame that they desire. That is not censorship, that's responsible journalism. I don't think I'm making a false equivalency, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Trump did and continues to behave in a rational, inflammatory manner. I think editorial staffs may exercise good ethics when it comes to giving him a platform. This actually I want to go back to the issue of rights, okay, and whether this is a violation of Donald Trump's free speech rights. There's a lot of different schools about rights, okay. I tell people every day, whether you agree with inalienable rights and the way the Bill of Rights hinges on inalienable rights doesn't change the fact that the people who wrote it believe those things. And so therefore, you have to still interpret everything in the light of that understanding of inalienable rights, because that's the way they understood it when they wrote the thing. So, I mean, from an atheist point of view, the origin where the rights come from anything. But for me, when you look at the founders, they were very non-faith oriented, most of them. That most of them were deists. They were products of the Enlightenment, which had gone to great lengths to distance itself from religion and, Enlightenment thinking. Now, they still were pretty rough, but I think the founders show what I would call a kind of genius for understanding government. And, they were kind of proponents of certain aspects of political science, and that's the direction they went. So, but I often find this interesting about the private company thing, because it's interesting where we draw the line on what are rights of an employee or a user of a service or a buyer of a product have when they step into somebody's what they own in private sphere. It's almost, and there's arguments to be made. As a libertarian, I recognize that there's arguments on both sides of this issue. One side says these are private companies, the government shouldn't have anything to do with them. The owner should be able to run things the way they want, delete who they want, get rid of who they want, serve who they want. Except we don't agree with that, okay? Because under certain other issues, if you refuse service, you can receive a fine for it. For instance, if an African American comes into a diner and a diner basically says, you're not allowed to eat here, then that African American can immediately sue under civil rights violations and win, because that's the law. The law is you cannot refuse service on the basis of color of skin, gender, any of that stuff, and religion as well. So at that point, like it or not, that service provider is still forced to serve that customer, and private company be damned. So the question then becomes, what rights this is where it gets fuzzy for me. And this is why I think people need to recognize that when it comes to a discussion of rights and what rights a business owner has, you better be careful here. I mean, because we don't allow a business owner, if I walk into a business owner and he shoots me and I die, he's not going to be able to make the defense, well, it's my property, so I can deny him the right to live. If I come into a person's private property, they tie me up and make me a prisoner, kidnap me, let me have liberty. That's not within their purview as a property owner. So do they have the right to stop me from pursuing my happiness, even though I'm on their property? That's a good question, and that's a good poli-sci question. See, because it's interesting that we say that an employee or a customer or somebody that's using the service of a private business owner, there are certain rights that private business, even though he owns the business, he still can't violate. And so that's the other side, the other libertarian argument that says, if government is supposed to do anything, it's supposed to protect the rights of all citizens equally. And if a business owner is treating different people in a discriminatory manner and being unequal, then the government should step in and say, no, you shouldn't do that. You can't do that. So there's arguments on both sides. And I'm not saying which one. I mean, I'll lean towards the business owner argument, except it seems to me that we're picking and choosing which rights the business owner doesn't get to violate and what he does get to violate. If they're rights and they're inalienable, or they're connected to inalienable rights, it seems to me maybe free speech might be one of those. Then perhaps Twitter and Facebook are violating the First Amendment, just as somebody who denies the rights of a person because of color comes in and said, I'm not going to serve you because you're African American. That would be a violation of that person's civil rights, regardless of the fact that the guy owns the diner. So that kind of is where I want to bring out some discussion on that issue, because as an atheist, I look at human beings, and there's two schools of thoughts where rights come from in that bet. And atheists tend to leave the natural rights argument and head for consequential rights argument. Now, what consequential rights, most of us probably know what natural rights is. It's inherent to the person. All people are endowed with their creator by certain inalienable rights. And what the founding fathers meant by creator, it has nothing to do with any Christian God or anything. And I would say that there's some element of truth to that, because all human beings, we have to treat all human beings equally as far as opportunity and things like that, because there really is no basis from any kind of standpoint, in my opinion, as an atheist, to create a hierarchy of rights. where some people get this kind of rights and some people, no, you're going to have to treat everybody equally because you have no really scientific basis to do otherwise. But then consequentialist rights is more of, we agree that these are all rights because they actually are more ethically sound, as good for everybody, and they have developed in such a way that we realize that societies that follow these rights do better than societies that they don't. So it's more of a consequentialist view. And I think a lot of atheists head that route because they say, well, okay, I don't believe in natural rights coming from a creator, so why do I believe in rights? So this is the overall discussion I want to get into. Now, one more thing I want to do, because a Christian friend of mine, who is still a preacher and a Calvinist, and I think he teaches at a Bible college of some sort, I can't remember, but he posted an article from National Review Online. This is The Christian Invention of the Human Person by Cameron Hilditch. In it, he tries to make the case that it is because of Christianity's idea that, and I'm shifting gears a little bit because it is a discussion on rights, because I want to contrast the idea of Christian rights, so-called, with Enlightenment thinking, because the writer here is Cameron Hilditch, and the idea he's trying to get across to people in this short article, and I'll link it in the description, is that somehow Christians are the ones that came up with these ideas of moving somebody from persona non grata, that is not a person, to a person, that somehow is Christian ideas, and that the Enlightenment took those ideas and put them out and forward. The problem I have with that is I know a little bit about the history of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment thinkers kind of looked at religion and said, yeah, that's nonsense. They were some of the first critical thinkers you would ever have. And I'm not really sure how that works historically, because from a standpoint of history, the Christians in the world, even as late as the Civil War in the United States, was arguing the idea that there were certain people that were better people and thus persons. And black people, for instance, in the United States were regarded as lesser persons. And it was preachers getting in the pulpit, Christian preachers, providing that avenue. So I'm reading this article, and I'm going to leave it for all of you to read. But he gets to this one line, and I almost laughed out loud, because he's sitting there telling me where all these rights came from. And he is saying that it was Christians who came up with some of these rules, and because they came up with these rules, these are certain rights that we hold today that Enlightenment thinkers have, but they really came from Christianity. And I want to take this on because I want to go back to this idea of rights and looking at the two schools of thought. The problem I have with the natural rights theory these days is it seems to assume that they came from some divine source. Now, you can still be an atheist and hold to a natural rights theory simply by saying that we're all human beings and we're all entitled to the same rights because we're all the same as human beings. But that also exalts a few other places where things get a little bit higher. But I want to read one paragraph in particular, actually the end of a paragraph, where this writer goes, the scholar Brian Tierney notes that already by 1300, a number of rights were regularly claimed and defended on the basis of Christian understanding of personhood. Now, I'm going to read this list of rights, and for those atheists in the room, please hold your laughter, because I couldn't believe that somebody would say this. See, because by 1300, we still were in the medieval mucky-muck of medievalism in Europe. We had feudalism, we had serfs that were obviously lesser human beings. This idea of personhood really driven home by 1300. Now, I want to hear what they said. They would include rights to property, really. By 1300, Christianity owned most of Western Europe and a good chunk of Eastern areas, particularly around Constantinople. I want to understand something, that the whole feudalistic system is designed that the lords have right to property and everybody else works in their employ. There was no understanding of a right to property in this era, other than the right of the lords through the divine right to own the property. The idea that a serf could own property was laughable. So this idea that there was any equality in this and it was somehow a right, no, it was a privilege to own property, and the elite few were the ones that owned it. I don't know where this writer Brian Turney even gets this bloody idea. Really? Since when? And where would they get this from the Bible? I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but the only ones that had rights to property in the Bible were the Jews. They literally claimed that their right to Palestine is based simply on the fact that God promised it to Abraham through their son Isaac. This is their idea of, we have the right to this property because of this fine, and everybody else can just go suck it. Where would you get that from the Bible? There's certainly nothing spoken on about the rights of property, except maybe by Jesus, if you consider the fact that every time he tells the story of the landowner has the absolute right to the property, how he's going to pay his people, which is all the same regardless of how long they worked. Obviously, they didn't have a union, and so on and so forth. I do not know how that guy, Brian Turney, can say that statement, at least right now. Right of consent to be governed. Well, they sure didn't get that from the Bible, did they? I just had a discussion about this week, about Romans 13, 1 through 7, about how it requires everybody to absolutely submit to the authorities. There is no consent. There is no consent to government in anything. There is an enslavement to government, and you are forced to bow to government in Christianity. So even if what you say is true, that somehow magically these Christians by 1300 had these rights of consent to be government, I'm sorry, that came out of the Enlightenment. The idea of, you know what, we should consent to be governed by these people, and if they don't govern well, we need to get rid of them, doesn't come around until thinkers like John Locke and a few others, where they talk about this consent necessary to be government, and the founding fathers picked that up and they run with it. That's how they got that idea. But it sure as hell didn't have anything to do with the Bible, because the Bible in Romans 13 makes it very clear. If you're a rebel and you even question the government, you're wrong. You're supposed to submit to the government, no matter how dictatorial, no matter how crappy they are, no matter garbage. Right to, and then he goes on, right to self-defense. What, really? Does a slave have a right to self-defense? Not in the Old Testament, they sure as hell didn't. Okay, if, the Old Testament law goes something like this. If you beat your slave and he gets up in a couple of days, then it's all right. But if he doesn't give it up or he dies, well, you're supposed to, that's just too bad. It's like, where would this come from the Bible? And where would it come from Christianity? Because they continue to do it. Rights of infidels. Not really. Where do you get this from the history up to 1300? By the 1300, there's been several crusades. The infidels were being killed. I'm sorry, I come from Scandinavian stock. I know full well how the Christians conquered Scandinavia. The church would give money to any lord that would convert. Okay, this didn't have a damn thing to do with better ideas or better rights. They were following the greed trail. The infidels would say, you know what, it's better to be a Christian because at least then the church will give me money to fight against the other infidels. I got my neighbor that's a pagan. I'm a pagan. You know what, I'm going to convert to Christianity. And then I'll fight my neighbor and I'll be funded by the church. This had nothing to do with this idea of better rights in Christianity. Marriage rights, holy damn. Even in the New Testament, which is more enlightened than the Old, I suppose, in some ways, you still have women basically being subservient to men, still the product of the property of their husband. Procedural rights. What procedural rights? I don't know. I'm not trying to be rude to this article writer, but you don't know your history and you still don't know much about anything. The Enlightenment age was a counterculture to the religious culture that came out of that day. The Renaissance led to more enlightenment, which led to further Renaissance and enlightenment until we got this idea of rights from the political science movement that came at the time of John Locke and Jefferson and the rest of them. I'm not trying to be rude to Christians, but the one place I won't look for a discussion of rights anymore is them. And I think the big one is slavery, the real big one. The rights would include right to property. When we talk about right to property and the right of an owner, we need to be very careful here, because there is something to be said of, okay, if my rights are suddenly forfeit because I walk onto somebody else's property, can they enslave me? Am I a lesser person? Well, that idea shouldn't come from atheism or any kind of other thing like that. It should come, and probably does come, from any kind of religion. From the Muslim world, if you're a caliphate, if you're, one of the infidels to them, they can enslave you. If you're a Christian, for the longest time, up to 1865 probably, there were preachers preaching that certain races were inferior. And thus, they were either the children of Cain or, we kidnapped them from nations outside ourselves so we can enslave them for perpetuity, just like the Old Testament says. I'm not trying to be rude, and I guess I'm not trying to be a dick either, but I'm just not seeing where Christianity leads us to any kind of rights. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave that discussion. I want to briefly deal with one comment that was made to me by somebody being a little bit kind to me, and this was about a day ago. I've gotten a lot of comments recently, and there's no way I can address all of them anymore at this rate that I'm gaining subscribers. So one side of me is very thrilled that I'm getting more subscribers. On the other hand, I really have to kind of pick a comment of the day. I'll try to gauge some of the rest of them as I do it. But Julie Howman wrote a comment to me a day ago on my deconversion story, saying, having dedicated so many years committed to a mankind starting, you must have a void where that once rested. I hope you will forge your way forward in a manner that fulfills your pastor's heart. There are many opportunities in the secular sector where you experience the depression, and overcome it can be beneficial to the cause. I am sorry that you tasted the hypocrisy of so many devout Christians firsthand. I want to address the part of this comment. First of all, thank you. I appreciate your concern, Julie. Wonderful comment. It's nice to hear comments like that from time to time, because I often wonder what the hell I'm doing sometimes and why. And it's comments like that that keep me going. But as for what fulfills my pastor's heart, I'm actually pursuing something that I was starting to pursue last year at this time, but then COVID. So I'm back at it. I'm working on a certification that I think will lead me into a career that's very much like being a pastor in that sense, and yet also very secular. So, I just wanted to let you know, and everybody else know that may have that concern when they read my conversion story, that I am going forward with my life, and I'm not sitting on my laurels. I'm just trying to go forward and do the things that I need to do. Okay, with that, I'm going to call it a video. I appreciate all of you standing by and listening to all that. And I'm very interested to hear your comments about rights and Christian rights versus the atheist concept of rights, or any discussion about rights, because we have some interesting questions to ask ourselves, and we don't have a God to look to find those answers. So we need to look at humanity and look at how we do things and say, hey, can we find a different way to do this? And so once again, thank you for all your comments that I'm sure I'm going to get, but also for stopping by. And hopefully someday I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Rabyd, also known as the Rabyd Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.